Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the third edition of GIF Talk. GIF GIF Talk is actually a series of talk as a part of the Green Innovation Fund, a joint initiative by Kerala Startup Mission, Harita Kerala Mission, and UNDP. GIF Talk. Uh, in GIF Talk, we navigate what it means to be a social entrepreneur today. In a world that is rapidly changing, growing, and consuming, it has become ever more pertinent to ensure that we have the means to support and provide for our fellow Earthlings, whether it be human or otherwise, without upsetting the delicate balance that we have borrowed from future generations. With GIF Talk, we explore how social development is moving from an activist end of spectrum and evolving into a thriving ecosystem, which incentivizes more and more people to create positive impact on their surrounding while being rewarded by the society for the work they are doing. This is the third edition of GIF Talk series. We had Mr. Jaimon and Mr. Dr. Krishnan, senior leaders at UNDP, talking about sustainable development goals and how UNDP Country Accelerator Lab is supporting innovation and innovations related to SDGs in the first edition. In the second edition, we had Mr. Prateek, the CEO of Assistive Technology Foundation, speaking about the hard things of being a social entrepreneur. And today, we have with us Mr. Amit Antony Alex, the country director at Upaya Ventures, to have a dialogue on funding opportunities for social entrepreneurship. Welcome, Amit. So, I think without further ado, I'll hand over to you. For the sake of the audience, please introduce yourself and a bit of what you do at Upaya and what Upaya does for early stage innovators.
Sure. So Upaya is an early stage impact investor. What that means is we provide financial capital to startups, but with a very specific focus of investing in companies that create employment or livelihood opportunities for people in extreme poverty. The idea being that to really bring people out of poverty, what they need is a regular source of income. So Upaya then, or our theory of change is by investing in companies that create those employment or income generating opportunities. That's a sustainable means where they are able to continue to employ people who are in extreme poverty. Thereby, in a period of time, the people that are employed because of a continuous source of income, be able to pull themselves out of poverty. So within Upaya, I had the operations in India, and I've been in the social enterprise. Along with that, Upaya, just slightly a bit more about Upaya. We've done about 23 investments in India so far, and our ticket size is up to about $50,000.
So, as I was telling in the GIF talk, we are trying to define what it is mean to be a social entrepreneur. So, I would like to kind of get your perspective of how you define a social entrepreneur and what it is to be a social entrepreneur in India.
Okay, so I can start with saying how I define social entrepreneurs. So for me, social entrepreneurs are any entrepreneur who's trying to solve a social issue. The legal structure of an organization is secondary. It's the intent of the person or the entrepreneur that matters. So as long as they're trying to solve a social issue, I would classify them as a social entrepreneur. Within the social entrepreneurship space, you could be a not-for-profit or a for-profit, right? It's just a legal structure that you structure it based on the kind of work that you're doing, the fundraising required. It just makes it. That's the two key reasons why somebody would legally structure it. But for me, when we talk about social entrepreneurship, it can be both for-profit or not-for-profit.
Okay. So, I mean, again, in Startup Mission, we are more oriented towards the for-profit enterprising individual. So, regarding for-profit, what are the kind of? I hope in Upaya also you work more closely with the for-profit social entrepreneurs, right?
Yeah.
So, what is the demography of those? I mean, are they all young people, or who are those social entrepreneurs? I mean, how do you
Sure. Sure. So even at Upaya, we only look at for-profit social entrepreneurs, or let's start calling them social enterprises, because Upaya does equity investments, and you can only do equity investment in a private limited company. In terms of the demographics, I think they are quite there. There isn't really any trends, other than the fact that I think a lot more younger people are getting interested in social entrepreneurship. Whereas if you talk to social entrepreneurs who are 25 plus, they usually have identified an issue, trying to solve it. Then they realize there's this, they will come in, know about social entrepreneurship, and that's how they get involved. So demographic wise, I haven't seen any specific trends.
So you are talking about the for-profit, and you spoke about the equity investment. So what are the? I mean, there are other instruments also, like for the fund perspective. How are the? What are the other mechanisms of getting funds?
Sure. So if you're a for-profit social enterprises, there are primarily three ways you can look at fundraising. Of the availability of fund can be classified into three. One is equity. Equity is where you give a percentage of your company to someone for capital. And Upaya does equity investments. The second is debt, wherein you borrow money, so it ends up in your balance sheet, and for a certain interest rate, so a loan. And the third is grants. There are now grant funding opportunities that are available even for-profit enterprises, if they can justify their social mission. So these are the three main sort of categories of funding. We can now, if it makes sense, talk more in detail within equity. What are the different instruments that are possible? And then from there, it makes sense to look at what stage, what kind of funding makes sense. And I'm happy to talk about who are the potential investors that are out there as well.
I mean, I'm sure that is one aspect I want to really know because when we floated this interest from understanding what are the topics they want to listen to, most of them actually spoke. They want to know more about how to get fund and the funding opportunities and in the social entrepreneurship, because it's really hard to kind of balance the business aspect and the impact aspect, especially for an early stage innovator.
Yeah.
So, and where does this CSR perspective, all this comes under grant, or is it a separate?
Yeah, no. So most of the CSR funding comes under grant. I think in 2017 or 19, Government of India changed the rules wherein CSR money could be channeled through incubators and accelerators that either under the Atal incubation program or that is linked to some academic institution. There, the accelerator gets a grant from CSR funding and they do an equity investment. So that's separate, but if a company is directly receiving, then it'll be a grant. That's the only way CSR money can be deployed in a for-profit company.
Cool. And you were talking about the other instruments of funding. So if you could just enlighten on that aspect.
Sure. So starting with just understanding the life cycle, right? We all keep hearing about it in terms of starting at an incubation stage, right? You have an idea, you want to fundraise, you want to do a pilot. Where do you get funding as a social enterprise, right? Which is similar to any for-profit company as well. Is you will find it very, very difficult to find investors at that stage, simply because the risk involved is higher. Which is why most social enterprises even get their first round of funding from friends and family. So you go around and put on your smile, be nice, and then try and raise money, right? So friends and family is always the first source of fundraising, right? What a lot of social enterprises are doing successfully now is also doing crowdfunding at that stage, wherein they are able to sell a story, right, of impact. And that there are now platforms available in India, like Keto, Milab, that you can use for crowdfunding. So that's at an idea stage. The next area that you should look at an idea stage is now there are a number of incubators that are specifically focused for social enterprises. I would say 10 years ago, there was only one incubator for social enterprises. Now there are, I would say, about 10 to 15 that I can think of that specifically focuses on supporting social enterprises. So this is when you have an idea, you want to start off your pilot, you want to get access to some funding, you want access to mentors. Look up for these incubator supports. Some of the known ones, for example, are the Unlimited program based out of Bombay. They support close to, I think, 40, 50 social entrepreneurs, both for profit and not for profit. The Kalinga Institute of Technology in Orissa it's a GPI. It has a specific track that looks at social enterprises. Startup Oasis, based out of Jaipur, has a very specific focus on social enterprises. Sangam Ventures, which is a fund that does incubation program, based out of Gurgaon, if I remember. Then I am Bangalore as NSRCL, that runs an incubator. So there are now a number of incubators that are supporting social enterprises. As a social entrepreneur, what you need to keep in mind is what is the area that you're focusing on. So within social enterprises, you could be working in education, for example, or you could be looking at environment or waste management. Most incubators tend to have specific focus areas. So my suggestion across this webinar would be do a lot of research. Now data is available or information is available within your fingertips. Do your research. So that's at an incubation stage, right? It's post-incubation stage where you're able to show some traction, which is you have some revenue, some customers, end of the day, is when investors start showing interest. Or I would say that's when investors usually invest in. Unless you have a huge technology play, that's when you see, and that's what you keep reading about in the news where an idea got $100,000 investment, things like that. That if you read between the lines, it's usually almost always a huge technology play. Within the social enterprise sector, very rarely are an idea stage company funded. Hence, my honest advice at that stage is don't go after investors. Use your friends and family, use your network for fundraising. So the second stage, which is the seed stage, is when you've been able to show some kind of attraction, right? That's when there are now mainstream or institutional investors available for you. So organizations like Upaya, Beyond Capital, Will Grow, Sangam Ventures is another one that do very early stage investing. Even the investment size is, I would say, between $50,000 to $100,000. So anywhere between 35 to 70 lakhs. So under a crore, let's call it. That's when a seed stage investment comes in. And at this stage, it makes sense to take equity investment. You don't have enough cash flows for you to pay off your loans. Therefore, debt doesn't make sense. Equity investment makes the most sense. Negotiate well on the terms. That's a separate session altogether. But yeah, at this stage, you look at seed stage investors, and now there are at least 4 or 5 seed stage investors. Post the seed stage investment is when you grow your company. You're at a scale, right? You're scaling up your operations. You're doing revenues of anywhere between 10, 15 lakhs a month, and you're scaling up and you need funding. This is when usually working capital needs kicks in. You need cash to run your operations, or operating costs need to be met. This is when you should look at debt funders. And within sort of the social impact investing space, There are debt investors who focus on social enterprises. Again, some of them tend to be very sector focused. So, for example, Samunati is an organization that only looks at supporting companies in the agri value chain space, doing pure debt deals. They even look at, let's say if you're working with a group of farmers, and farmers usually need credit, be it for inputs or fertilizer, things like that. Samunati works with you where you underwrite the risk of the farmers, and then they provide the farmers directly. So that's another example. So at the growth stage is when you're looking at debt for working capital. Samunati is one, Caspian is another, Yunus Social Business is another that do debts. Anywhere between, I would say, again, upwards of 10-15 lakhs to crore, 2 crores. And their interest rate ranges between 10 to 18%, 10 on the lower side. But it's always more expensive than your mainstream bank for a loan, simply because these are unsecured loans. So that's on the debt side. On the equity side now, there are a lot, again, another set of investors who do investments, let's say from $250,000, so about 3-4 crores upwards. So your Ankur Capital, Acumen Fund, all Elivar Equity, they all fall under this category. They call themselves early stage because if you look at from their point of view, that's still an early stage investment. So they are ideally to propel you to scale geographically, right? Let's say you're operating in Kerala, you want to scale up to Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, and Andhra, for example. That's when you look at these kind of investors, and they purely look at a scalable model, because now you're talking purely about commercial investments coming in, even though they are called impact investors. So be very, very clear and understand that. So once you receive investment from the stage, you're really scaling up your operations, right? And then there's a whole next set of investors, which is as good as private equity funds that are looking to invest, $1 million. So 7 crores, 8 crores of investment money. It might be done in multiple tranches. You're talking about the Avishkar or the International Finance Corporation, World Bank. They tend to fund organizations at this scale. So this is, in short, a plethora of the investors across the growth of a company.
Amazing. You kind of from the very beginning to end, and in a very lucid style, but still, I think I need some time to kind of sink in all the things you spoke. And also, you have opened up a lot of interesting threads. Also, I mean, the thread I will like to chase a bit. So I'm sure most of the startups sitting here would be on a very early stage, kind of put that smile and kind of raise fund from the family as a beginning. But then the next stage, you said, this smile won't do when you want to do the crowdsourcing, right? It's all about the narrative. You already mentioned the narratives. So how do you advise them to build that narrative? Like, what are some of the interesting narrative that stuck to personally to you, and any particular narrative from the Kerala startups you worked with?
Sure. So a couple of organizations that I've interacted with in Kerala. One is, I think it's called I Love 9 Months. They are a woman-led organization working with addressing issues around pregnancy and post-pregnancy issues that mothers and newborn children face. Again, from Upaya's point of view, it didn't fit our criteria, but it was simply the passion of the entrepreneur that made it interesting for us to, or at least for me personally, to just interact with the founder. And it starts with storytelling, right? And it's very, very important for social entrepreneurs. Even before you get into the financial sustainability, you need to be able to sell a story. And a story doesn't have to be an half-an-hour conversation. It can be 4 or 5 lines. It is starting with What is the social issue that you are addressing? How you are addressing? How you are able to scale up that? And then, if possible, give an example. Examples of things people can relate to. Let's say you, like, for example, I love 9 months, right? They were able to talk about one specific woman who had challenge, that they faced post pregnancy and how they addressed it. So it's something that most of us will be able to relate to because we've seen it around us. So that's the number one thing is storytelling. That's how you get the investors' attention. Then the thing the investor is always going to ask you is, okay, what are your numbers? Right. So just knowing very clearly your financial data. What is your current traction? How much do you plan to achieve over the course of, let's say, realistically, when I talk to startups, the next 2 years, how much can you realistically grow? Right. Be very, very clear about it. Be able to give facts in terms of how you will grow as well and how you have grown. And the third is understanding how your fund is going to be utilized. Right. That's where another big gap area that I always see when investors speak to entrepreneurs is, I have a business, I'm doing so much revenue, I need funding. What do you need the funding for? It'll be to hire a team. Okay, now give me details in terms of how much salary you need to pay. Then they go silent. So they haven't really thought about, how you're going to utilize the money. It's like putting in a mutual fund, and the mutual fund manager doesn't tell you where they are investing. Right? You will not give the mutual fund the money. So be very clear about it and have that linked to your financial model. Don't have a financial model that is not linked to your narrative, because if the investor is interested, the next thing he's going to ask for is a pitch deck and a financial model. Your financial model needs to be very clearly linked to your narrative. These are three, I would say, basic things. And this is not just for social enterprises, right? For the social enterprises, the storytelling part kicks in, where you play to sentiments. Whereas if you're a regular startup, you still use that to sell your company. But everything else remains the same, whether you're a social enterprise, because the investor still thinks about it from an investment point of view.
Okay, so whether when we mention the impact aspect of it, like how seriously an investor will be interested in the impact, and how an investor will quantify an impact. I mean, will you just buy that story? Just like that, or he do some quantification of it?
Yeah. Now, this is a tricky question because there isn't a fixed answer, because every investor looks at social impact in a very different way. So this goes back to my earlier point of doing research. Every impact investor has specific focus areas. That knowledge is very clearly available online. You go to their website, you will understand that. If you go to Acumen invests in 3 areas: agriculture, education, and clean energy. So if you're a healthcare company, right now to go to Acumen doesn't make sense. They've done healthcare in the past. Right now, these are the 3 focus areas, for example. Right? Upaya does only livelihood. Okay, so if you're a fintech company, it doesn't really interest us unless there is a clear livelihood angle. Right? So understand your investor, understand the sector that they invest in. That's the first step. Second is then look at what is the data available about the investor's impact. Different investors will have different sets of data. Some might have just very high level numbers. Then the level of sort of social impact that they look at. They are looking at more qualitative data, right? It could be how many farmers you are working with, or how many students have you been able to reach, right? So very, very high level data. Companies like or organizations like Upaya, for example, we take social impact very seriously, right? We will want to know, because we are in the livelihood space, there are very clear metrics that we track, right? So we will want to know, okay, if you are providing employment for 5 people, what is the salary that you're paying them? All right. What was the salary that they were earning earlier? What is the alternative salaries that they can earn? We would want information on their household data. So how many people are there? Who all are earning? Do they have a motorcycle? Do they have television? Do they have electricity access? That gives us a sense in terms of what their socioeconomic background is. So again, depending on investor to investor, they range in terms of the social impact data that they ask for. Now, as a company, how do you be prepared? See, that's the key thing, right? So always have high level information, right? First thing to do is whatever sector that you're working in, identify what are metrics to track, right? So there are already sort of metrics that are created, starting with SDG goals, right? This is agreed worldwide and everybody understands the SDG goals. Identify what are SDG goals that are linked to your company, right? That's a starting point at a very high level. If you're in the education space, you know which SDG you're working under, right? If you're in waste management or let's say providing clean water, you know which are the SDGs you're working with. That's a very high level sort of metric to start. Then look at where are you creating social impact, right? This comes to what is known as a theory of change. How your activities bring out outcomes, right? Therein you can start tracking. So let's say if you're in the education space, have data in terms of how many kids you are providing education for. If you're in healthcare space, right? How many patients are you reaching, right? That's again the very basic metric. Have that on a quarterly basis, on a monthly basis, right? End of the day, these are also business metrics when you think about it, right? That you should be tracking regularly. Let's say if your main income driver in a healthcare is that you need to track the number of patients, you should have that data. It's not just social impact, right? It's a clear business metric. If you're providing clean drinking water, for example, you should know how many liters of water you've provided, how many households you've been able to sell to, right? Even though they are also social impact data. I think even when you're talking to investors, I think starting with these high level data is great, right? Nobody's expecting you to do impact assessment service. And then to the last part of your question, how does investors look at it? So I can talk from Upaya's point of view very clearly. Any company we invest in, we go and visit the operations on ground. So all the data that you have provided, what we do during what is a due diligence or a field visit is to go validate, right? Given that you have said livelihood, let's say you said you're working with 1,000 farmers. When we go on the ground, you struggle to help us meet with 5 farmers. That is a red flag, right? And these are live examples I'm talking about that has happened. You say you work with poor farmers. When you go on the ground, the farmers that you meet own 10 to 15 acres, are earning 5 to 10 lakhs. That, under Upaya's example, is not poor farm, right? They might be poor farmers in that area. So, and then poor being a very subjective term, right? Poor in Kerala will be considered middle class in rural Chhattisgarh, for example, right? So we do field visits, and a lot of investors do that. Even in the COVID situation, I think I've traveled to visit 3 companies at least, because end of the day, if you want to make investments, we have to be on the ground to really understand the impact perspective as well. So that I hopefully answers the question in a very detailed manner.
Yeah, perfect. So, just curious, you spoke about investors. So, does angel investor do play a role in social entrepreneurship, or is it? I mean, they are not part of that game.
No, I think there's a lot more keener interest from angel investors. Angel investors traditionally have been known as commercial investors because they are an individual looking for a return and a faster return, right? I have seen a larger interest coming from angel investors within the social enterprise space. But the challenge there is it's linked to each individual's interest. So, for example, we've invested in a company that provides fresh milk in Coimbatore. we've done a co-investment deal with the angel network. Now, why did the angel investors come on board? Because most of them, when they were growing up, grew up drinking fresh milk. So that it's something that they could relate very clearly, because the kind of milk that they had when they were growing up, say 30, 40 years ago, and the kind of milk they were getting right now was significantly different. So they could clearly, empathize with the company and the challenge the company is trying to solve. So with angel investors, very similar to what I was talking about, investors having a very specific theme. Every angel investor has a cause that they can relate to, right? It's just based on their experience, where they have been, where they grew up. That's how it works. Now the challenge is every angel investor will have his or her specific interest, which becomes very difficult for when it comes to fundraising, right? Some investor might not have any interest in clean energy, for example, because they grew up in an area that always had electricity. But if it was somebody who grew up without access to electricity, they might be very passionate about it. So yes, there is a lot more interest in sort of angel investors coming into the social enterprise space, but it's even more trickier because it is based on somebody's perception or like passion for a specific sector.
And you mentioned about the time frame. The time for a conventional startup and a social impact startup might be different. So, how much is the difference? How much time you think to establish a conventional business model versus a social impact business model, or the social impact model? What is the normal difference in time you have observed?
Yeah, no. So I would say there isn't any fixed formula. It depends on models and models. I don't think there's a significant difference between a completely commercial startup versus a social enterprise. What is expected of a social enterprise is to do a lot more background research, right? Because you have two different stakeholders. You have somebody you are trying to create an impact, and then you have consumers or customers, right? Whereas in a traditional for-profit model, you have customers. You find a product or service and you sell to customers. So all your research is done on the customer side mostly. Whereas in an impact space, it's very important to understand what is the impact that you are creating for the beneficiary, the person of the group that you're trying to create. A very good example of this is MIT, the famous university, ran in the 90s a program called One Laptop Per Child. The idea was MIT had the smartest tech brains in the world. They said giving a laptop to a child, especially in Africa, will help enable them to learn quicker, which in theory sounds great, right? What they didn't think about, which is where the research part comes in, right? Simple things. Access to electricity in rural Africa is nil. So having a laptop becomes useless. Teachers, for example, weren't trained in using laptops. So you had suddenly a classroom full of students with laptops, even with electricity, but the teachers had never used laptops. Now, who's going to teach them how to use? So these are some, when you retrospectively think about it, this is the most simplest thing, right? But you are the smartest group of people looking at it, which is why that background research is very important, especially in social impact, and that's when usually it takes a slightly longer time than a regular startup.
Yeah, and so you have to get your assumptions right from the beginning. I mean, you don't have the luxury to get that assumption go wrong, I guess.
So you have to get your assumptions and you have to go test your assumptions, right?
Yeah. I think we can go on talking almost 30, 35 minutes we've been talking. So I think let's involve some of the participants also here. So I request if anyone want to ask question directly, please use the raise hand button there. We'll give you the speaking permit.
So I think there's one question that I see
from Mr. Vinod. So it's
yes.
about growth rate. Growth rate you expect a startup to achieve as an investor.
Yeah, no, so I wouldn't say there is a percentage growth rate. What any investor wants to see is continuous growth. That's even become more challenging with especially 2020, where we have in businesses that we have invested that had to shut shop because they couldn't operate. What any investor wants to see is a growing growth rate. I wouldn't say it is 1x, 2x, 3x, right? The ability to keep continuously growing. So let's say if you in the first year you did 10 lakhs, no investor wants to see 10 lakhs the next year. That is not a good sign. 10 lakhs to 15 lakhs, that's a 50% growth rate. That's a good sign. So as long as you're able to grow your business, right, that is what an investor is expecting. Once the investor puts in money, the idea is if you had grown 50%, can now that 50% growth with the capital be 100%, right? So that's a conversation that you and your investor, and that's what the financial model plays a big role, right? Because that's your projections. You need to be clear in terms of how you're going to achieve that.
Okay. So there are another question coming in from Tony. Okay. So I'm just reading it out. So it's regarding the Arikanet plans in Assam to preserve diamond art of handmade. Just 1 second.
So I think the question is around what are the critical areas of support at the initial stage. Okay, so Upaya does a lot of work in terms of support beyond financial capital. What we see, the number one thing that we work with entrepreneurs is just setting up an accounting and MI system. Again, these are things that you would think any enterprise has in place, but we tend to see that they don't. What accounting and MIS brings in is controls. How much money is being spent, how much money is coming in, how much money is going out, tracked on a regular basis. That also includes setting key financial and social impact metrics. So the Arcanet plate example, right? As an investor on a quarterly basis, I want to know how much raw material has been collected. I want to know how much is in inventory, how much money is in account receivables, how much money is in accounts payables. Without a proper accounting system, companies, especially at early stage, struggle with this data. Right. Most of the time, what they've done is they have outsourced this to their CA, and the CA basically gets bills and some information and creates a P&L statement. P&L statement doesn't give you a very clear idea, right? And then that's almost done on only on an annual basis when audit is required. So the idea is to bring financial discipline by creating an accounting and MI system. That's the first critical area. The second area that Upaya supports at the initial period is building a team. Right. The idea is now you're scaling up. You've got investment. You can hire people. Okay. And this is a big challenge we at Upaya and our entrepreneur space. We invest in companies that work in very rural areas. Now, how do you find talent in these areas? So I am being very honest, and I don't have a solution to it. So, for example, we have invested in two companies in this region called Bhawanipatna in Kalahandi district, which is considered one of the poorest districts in India. I need to find a marketing person there for both these companies. It's impossible because no young person wants to go and live in Kalahandi, right? If you want to find qualified people, it's very difficult in rural areas. So building a team, setting up a culture, setting up processes, working on leadership with an entrepreneur. If you are social entrepreneurs, for example, you are passionate about the cause that you're trying to solve or address, right? Letting go is one of the biggest challenges social entrepreneurs face. And as you grow your business, it's important to delegate, right? And we've seen social entrepreneurs wanting to micromanage, and that leads to a different huge set of problems. So working with the entrepreneur, helping them, improve their leadership style, Delegation is one of them. Giving feedback, for example. Once you hire a professional, you can't shout at them like the person, you can't shout at them. Let me put it that way. Simple examples that I am basing it on experience, right? So these are the first area is accounting and MIS, so that there is financial discipline. The second is around organizational development. And the third area, given that we are impact investors, is to help companies track social impact. All the metrics that we were talking about, right? So we work with companies, help develop their theory of change, and identify key metrics that they could continue to track on a regular basis.
Perfect. Some of them are trying to ask the question here, but not able to use the chat. So one has actually messaged me one question. So
Sure.
in something similar to what you said of getting married to a particular idea and not able to let go of it. And also, I mean, I could relate to when you said people kind of being a single one-man army and kind of trying to do everything. So I've seen people, especially in social entrepreneurship kind of space, working like that. So this question is regarding, for example, I realized there is a problem in my locality. I tried to solve it, but how will I scale it up? Like, what is the problem I'm trying to solve? So I'm very passionate about solving that. I know that's a problem which I want to solve, but how will I kind of measure whether it's scalable and even if I want to tweak it, how should I tweak it to scale it? How will you?
Got it. Sure. So those goes back to the question around testing your assumptions, right? So you say you want to solve an issue. Understand the issue as much as possible, right? What is causing the issue? So let me take the example of plastic, right? Plastic waste is a big challenge, right? There are enough and more people trying to solve the issue. Now, how do you go about it? What is causing the plastic problem? Why are people just throwing plastic? And let's even make it even more granular, right? What I want to solve is along the railway line, plastic. If you even in Kerala, even though we call ourselves educated and things like that, if you travel on trains and you look at the railway line, the amount of waste that is there is terrible. So these are educated people traveling on train who are just throwing bottles of plastic outside. And it's not even people living in that area, right? You could be living next to a railway line and there are people throwing waste outside. So the question is, what is causing this, right? So then you go to the cause of these problems, right? Then you identify what is causing them. Is there a solution to it? So for example, the railway line example that I'm using, because we can all relate to it, is maybe there isn't enough dustbins in trains. So people throw it, right? Or it could be that nobody cares that there is a fine. What if there is a fine? If people get caught, it's like your red light. As long as there's a cop standing next to the next signal, everybody follows rules. So, how do you bring about stricter enforcement of rules, right? And then it is how big is the problem, right? Some problems are very localized. They need solution. They are not for investors, right? Because you can't scale it. For example, and I'm thinking of some examples that I can give. So, for example, endosulf usage, fertilizer usage in North Kerala. That's a very localized problem. Even if you find a solution, that fertilizer, let's say, is only used in that area, right? It's not a problem that can be scaled up. That's for me, what a not-for-profit should be doing. That they identify a very localized problem and try and solve it. So it depends on the problem to problem, and understanding the scale of the problem and how do you solve it is looking at the cause and what can you address it.
So if I understand you correctly, what you're trying to say is when you're trying to solve a problem, it shouldn't be localized. It should be something scalable, right? You should.
So I wouldn't say it shouldn't be localized, right? Because local problems need to be solved as well. What I'm saying is, if you're looking for investment, don't go for a localized problem. Okay. So that is also a wrong way to put it. The way to put it is, see what you're passionate about. If you're solving a localized problem, don't go after investor money.
Yes. And don't think that it's a one-fit solution for everything, and this solution will be kind of applicable everywhere. I mean, every context is different, and you have to accordingly tweak the product. And
Yeah.
Yeah, and there is one question from Iralung, from Harsha, one of the participants here. So we are into manufacturing organic products. We have new
Mhm.
projects with the local artisans. We have created a cluster of local artisans, including handmade and handcraft artisans from local villages for producing our product. Since most of them lost their job because of COVID, we would like to expand our project across Kerala. So how do you suggest? What is your advice on doing this? Can
Yeah.
Upaya such
Sure.
ventures?
Yeah, no, almost all the companies that are working with local artisans, handicraft, handloom, have been struggling since COVID hit.
Mhm.
One is either in terms of production, being able to get them to work, get them raw materials. Also, on the other side is the other end, right? Consumer demand has gone down. It's slowly picking up. That is good to see. But at one stage, your buyers had stopped buying, be it B2B or B2C, right? Consumers were saving money. They said non-essential purchases are on hold. Or if it was a B2B customer, right? Let's say you have a partnership with a Fab India, or a larger sort of, let's say a retail big bazaar or someone, right? They had all stopped purchasing, right? Hopefully, right now the demand is going to pick up. So that is the only positive sign that I see. For example, my suggestion would be to is continue to improve or increase your customer base. That's the only way you can de-risk yourself, right? In a situation like this coming up again. And see, it's a demand and supply problem, is what I've understood. There is no point expanding the artisan base till you have clear demand for it, right? There is no shortage of artisans in India. I think there are about 7 lakh handloom handicraft artisans registered with Government of India, for example, right? So there is no shortage of supply, right? But demand and finding the right entrepreneurs is the biggest, as the customers is your biggest challenge, and being able to meet their requirement at the cost and design that they need. That's the area that I would say you should work
Perfect. We're almost into time. We are almost go part of that. So we'll take one last question and quickly end up this. So there's one question from Shilpa. She's asking, how do you normally kind of identify social entrepreneurs? Like whether they reach out to you or you kind of go scouting for social entrepreneurs in areas,
on.
especially.
Sure. So how do we do it? We try and build partnerships. We work out of an office space in Bangalore, and we try to work with entrepreneurs as far away as Bangalore as possible. So we try and identify partners, be it NGO, be it academic institutions, be it other entrepreneurs who we have already invested in, who are working in rural areas. So we network a lot. That's my honest answer of how we try and identify social entrepreneurs. And I'll be the first one to admit that there is a big challenge in identifying rural entrepreneurs. English is our main language. Most of India or rural India doesn't speak English. And there is a big set of entrepreneurs out there who are not, let's say, their communication channels. Let's just look at digital media, right? For example, your Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, they're all English. They are not on those channels. To reaching them is still a big challenge. I have a solution? Absolutely not. Which is why we network. We try and identify local organizations that we can partner with, who can give us access to these entrepreneurs. That's the only solution we've been able to find so far.
Yes. So coming back to the opportunity of our discussion, so where does philanthropy fit in? Like where?
Sure. So philanthropy has been evolving, I would say. So, for example, Upaya is a really good example of philanthropy, right? As compared to a larger fund, even a social impact fund. So, Upaya raises philanthropic money. So, there are individuals who give money that we invest in, right? And their return expectations is close to nil. So that gives us a larger time frame and we are able to take higher risks. Hence, we are able to do early stage investments. Got it. So philanthropy, at least in India, is still in the process of evolving. I think in the West, they have evolved much more where people realize that there is a need to invest in for-profit businesses as well. So there are individuals who are directly investing in companies. We have done co-investment deals. I think in India, it will still take time. There are a few sort of family offices of HNIs who are investing in social startups, for example. So it's still a process of evolution where philanthropy, if you take it at an individual level, the two key areas that Indians give money, so charity, is either for religion, so religious cause, or for something that they are personally passionate about. So it could be as simple as your mate's neighbor's kid is not feeling well, you will give money, right? But there is a study that shows almost 97% of Indians, their number one choice of giving money is religion. So there's still a lot more to evolve in philanthropy to be supporting startups in India.
Okay. So the last question I'll end with: what is the advice you have to all those social entrepreneurs out there, especially in Kerala, about how to start up and how to raise fund?
Sure. So my number one advice, and this is the wrong forum to give this advice, is to ask yourself: do you need funding? Right. There is a lot of talk about funding. You have to clearly understand that less than 1 in 100 companies get funding, or I think it's even greater than that. Right. We read in our media, there is enough talk about investment, where everybody is going after investment. So, especially as social entrepreneurs, always take a step back. And this is not only for social entrepreneurs, any entrepreneur, because you are putting your money in, okay? And ask yourself, do you need funding, right? And how you answer that question is simply by answering what is the return that you can give to an investor. So understand, be it a social investor or a regular investor, they are investor. The simple example I will give is if you put in an FD in a bank, which is considered the safest form, and the bank tells you, I don't know how much money you will get back, and I don't know how soon I will give it back to you. You will not put that money, right? It's the same with investors. That's the same risk that they are taking, right? They need that money back. So really think through whether you want investment, right? You could be a social entrepreneur, as I said, solving a social issue. It might not be a issue that needs to be scaled across India. You can still solve it because it's an issue, right? Look at creating sustainable businesses. That is my pure advice. Sustainable businesses survive. Again, if you look at India, India runs on the SME sector, right? The SME sector is the largest employment generator in India. And these are businesses that are running without any investment. All right. They grow in a sustainable manner. They access mainstream capital from banks. Or your first option should be to build your business on those lines. If you see the potential to scale your business, right, that is when you go to an investor, because as I said, I said this is not the right forum to be giving this advice, but sustainable businesses for me create more jobs and create a longer impact, right? Again, you have data in terms of number of startups that survive the first 2 years, right? There's the valley of death. Uh, you can avoid that by creating and building a sustainable business.
Perfect. On that note, I guess we can close the session. Thanks, Amit, for joining us. It's been a pretty candid conversation. I personally enjoyed this discussion with you. And for all the participants here, Amit is someone who kind of allowed to kind of mentor and support early stage startup, and he works closely with many of the Kerala startups as well. So, and in the Green Innovation Fund program, which we will be kind of it's currently active, Amit will be kind of obviously helping us in in some of the mentoring aspect for the first cohort. Thanks, Amit, and thanks once again for joining us. Thank you.
The pleasure is all mine. And sorry about the internet connectivity issue. I hope it will help afterwards.
No issues. Sometimes it happens. Thank you.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot.